vertical orientation today, so that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna go with it. Okay, so let me know in the chat where you're joining from. If you are joining where it's daytime, let me know, or if it's nighttime, let me know. I'm so excited for today's class because this is one of my favorite flowers in the world. I love foxgloves. And the reference that we're going to use is actually one from a painting I did back in 2020, which feels like it was so recently, but oh my goodness, now it's like such a long time ago. It's like 5 years ago, or I guess almost, well, 4 years, a little over 4 years ago. So let me talk through some supplies and we will jump into it. So I'm going to be using 2 similar sized brushes. One's an 8, one's a 6, but I think in the description I had said use 2 6s. Let me actually pull this in a little bit tighter for you guys. Let me know if you can see that pretty well. Okay, and I'm going to also have a small size 1 brush handy. I have, let's see here. We're going to use 4 different paint colors today. We're going to use, what is this one? Quinacridone red. We're going to use Windsor lemon, sap green, and ultramarine blue. And then I have here a sheet of paper that is about, I think it's about 8 by 8 inches. Cold press watercolor paper. That is very important. I've had a few people tell me they tried to follow along with my tutorials using like printer paper, and you're just not going to get the same results if you use printer paper. It doesn't work as well, and that's because true watercolor paper is made of cotton, and printer paper is made of tree pulp, so it's just going to work very differently. So hopefully you sketched out your foxglove ahead of time. If you didn't, you can go ahead and just pause this video. I'm not going to go anywhere if you just pause it. Click on the link that I have either in the chat or in the description, and then reference that sketch. You can either trace it or just reference it. You can print it out, trace it that way, or you can just hold up your watercolor paper to your computer and trace it that way. That's a lot of times how I will do it. And yeah, and then we can paint together because I'm not going to sketch this now in real time. As you can see, I already have mine prepared. So what we'll do today is we're going to start with the lightest colors. So we'll do an underwash, so the lightest possible values we see. And then we will go in for a second round, start adding some form, some dimension. And then after that layer dries, then we'll come in and do final details. There's a lot of details in this painting today, so be patient and kind of, I would say, bear with me because I do need to go over quite a bit of the same things, same types of details over and over. So what I'm going to start with is a very, very, very watery mix of either use alizarin crimson or quinacridone red, opera rose, whatever pink color you have is going to work perfectly. Even if you just have a red paint, use it. It's going to be great. Okay. So I'm just going to get a little bit of this pink mix here on my palette and then a ton of water. I'm going to grab a tiny bit of yellow as well. And let me pull this right here. Let's see if I can't make this so that you can see it all really well. This stream was definitely supposed to be horizontal, but I think I might have accidentally, in the settings, set it up vertical. I don't know. And then once you're live, you can't create a new link, so we just got to be flexible and go with it. Okay, so very, very watery mix here of the quinacridone red, tiny bit of yellow, and mostly water. And then what I'm going to do here, let's see, I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to go over all of the petals with this very, very light layer of pinkish yellow, only on the little buds, okay? So you might notice that we also have leaves up at the top. So what we're trying to do is just paint the small buds. And so the buds are a little bit more of a round shape. The leaves are a little bit more pointed. And we want this to be the faintest pink. If it's looking too dark, lift it. This is our lightest layer. And we want to maintain this color because this color is going to still show in a lot of the finished painting. We're going to be adding a lot of mid-tones and darker tones, but this light color is very important. I went a little bit dark, I think, here at the top of mine, so I'm just going to use my paintbrush, reach in there and just lift it up just a tiny bit. Just keep it nice and watery. As you can see, I got my trusty towel down here as well. So I blot as I need to. If there's too much paint in my brush, I'll just blot it here on my little towel. We actually don't grow foxgloves here. At least I haven't seen anybody grow them here. I'm sure you can. You know, like most plants, I feel like you can grow them anywhere, but are they going to thrive here? Probably not. I remember going for a bike ride with my dad in Oregon. They lived up in Hillsboro, Oregon for several years because my dad worked for Intel. But anyways, I remember going for a long bike ride with him and just seeing wild foxgloves everywhere. And, you know, whenever you visit a new place and you see flowers that you don't grow where you're from, you're always like, oh my goodness, look at these things just growing wild. They're like 5-6 feet tall. So huge. So I'll never forget that. That's the foxglove memory that I have like stamped in my brain. Okay, so let that dry. And then we will come back. Once those are dry, add a little bit more detail. So now we're going to go to our leaves. So for the leaves, I'm going to do this very light mixture of, we'll do a little bit of yellow with a little bit of green. You can keep it mostly on the green side, or mostly on the yellow side, sorry. I'm just going to do a tiny bit of green. And again, this will be watery. You don't have to make it as light as the flowers themselves. As I'm looking over at like the screen of the stream, I can see that it looks it looks so light. This pink looks very, very light. But this one won't look quite that light. So again, this is yellow and green. I'm using my size 8, or use your size 6, whatever you have. Just use a brush that's a little bit, like I would say a medium-sized brush. At least medium by my standards. I guess it depends on the scale you typically paint in, but to me this is a medium brush. I'm going to go ahead and paint all the leaves and the stems, but when you go up next to these flowers, be careful. You might not want to touch into that, because what's going to happen is either the green is going to flow into the pink, or that color is going to flow into your green. Water always is seeking for equilibrium. It wants to evenly spread. So if there's a side that's less watery, the side that is more watery is going to spread into it. Just wants to balance itself out. And then I'm going to go ahead and paint the stem as well. Okay. If the top of your flower is dried, you can go ahead and take your brush here and add in some little green details. If it's not quite dry, just pause or even just wait on this detail. Don't do this quite yet. Mine feels pretty dry up top, but actually I think I will wait just a second. And while I'm waiting for this to dry just a tiny bit more, I'm going to come back to my palette here and I'm going to mix a deeper pinkish yellow color for us to use here. So I'm going to reach into this quinacridone red. And I was actually, this is going to be a little maybe above some people's or go over some people's heads because some people aren't thinking about this kind of stuff yet, but I typically use a pink called alizarin crimson. And recently I was doing some research and it came to my attention that alizarin crimson is not the most light fast pink, which means that it can fade in time. Probably would take a very long time, and it would also probably mean being in direct sunlight. But this option here called quinacridone red is a really beautiful alternative, and it actually is a little bit more cool than alizarin crimson. So the temperature is a little bit on the cooler side versus the warm side. So I've been enjoying experimenting with quinacridone the last couple of weeks. I don't know if I'll keep it forever, but I like to have that option. Okay, so again, quinacridone red, and then I'm going to reach into yellow, clean off my brush here and grab some yellow. So this is going to be just a little bit of a darker mix of these two colors. I'm going to push it more towards the red, more towards the pink. Just ever so slightly. Okay, as that one's drying, I'm going to go over to our green as well. So let's get some more green mixed. So I'll reach over here into this sap green, activate that color, rub around in that little paint well. Sometimes I feel like sap green, I love this color. Sometimes I feel like it doesn't want to lift up into my brush as much as I wish it would. Every paint color, I feel like they all respond a little differently. Some of them are a little more stubborn to give me a lot of paint, and some of them you touch it once and you have way too much paint. So it's interesting. They're all just a little different, like their chemistries. At least I feel like you notice that the more you practice with them, the more experience you have with them, you'll notice little subtle differences like that. Okay, so I have some sap green mixed here. I will now grab a little bit of that green as well and bring that green into my sap green mix. So this is a very warm green. If it's got a lot of yellow in it, it's going to be on the warmer side. Okay, so now we have a couple different colors ready to go. Let's see how this is feeling up here. Mine feels pretty dry, so I'm going to grab some of this green mixture, and I'm going to come up here. I'm going to just go ahead and move this out of the way for a moment, and I'll go ahead and layer this green in. Into all of the little leaves we have drawn here. So again, some of them are little buds that haven't quite opened yet. Some of them are leaves. It's kind of hard to tell which ones are which. But if they have a little bit more of a pointy shape to them, you can go ahead and assume that that's a leaf. And also, if you accidentally paint one green that you should have left pink, I promise nobody will ever notice or question you about it. It's your painting, so you can get away with whatever you want here. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and go down the length here. Yep, mine feels dry. Again, if yours feels wet, wait to do this step or pause the video. You can go grab a blow dryer and dry it off. But and again, like I've just said, like this is your painting. If colors bleed, that's okay. Like that's also a beautiful effect. I love when colors bleed into each other in watercolor. But I also feel like you want to know what you're doing when colors are all bleeding together. A lot of times when painters have a lot of those blooms and bleeds and flow, a lot of times, that's intentional. It's kind of frustrating sometimes when it happens when you're not trying to make it happen. So that's why I say if you want to just pause it, you can do that. Okay, I'm going to go down here to the bottom. Since this is dry now, I'm going to layer in this green here. We'll be coming back for more details later. I'm going to add a little bit more green right there. We'll add more green in a few minutes. So let's go back to our pink color. So I'm reaching into this pink mixture here. Going to cry down and yellow. This is like a medium depth, okay? So earlier we did like the lightest pink that almost looks white. It wasn't, but it looks very white. And so what we're going to do is start up here at the top. And this is a little bit of a tricky detail here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this in even tighter for you guys. I want you to really see what I'm doing here. Okay. So just using the point of my brush, you can switch to a smaller brush. You can switch to a size 1 here. And I'm going to drop just the darkest pink just on parts of these little buds that haven't quite opened yet. So I'm trying to think about dropping it at the top of them and also kind of where they are intersecting with the other buds. And I know that's a little bit tricky. My advice here is just to go very light, have a light touch here, and try not to cover too much of the light pink that we just dropped in. I'm trying to think about adding in this darker pink where there might be a little bit of shadow, where two buds are meeting each other. Where might there just be a natural little shadowy bit? Okay, if that feels confusing, I have like a little hack, I guess I would say, or a little trick. You could also just kind of go along the pencil markings. That is technically not the exact shadows that I'm creating in my painting, but I feel like if you're just sort of confused and you want to just add a little bit of depth, try just very lightly following the pencil markings. That's just a little trick that might work. Okay. And definitely don't want your paint to be too dark here. If you're feeling like it's too dark, go back to your palette, add a bit more water. Okay, so as these buds are getting a little bit bigger, you might be able to see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing as I'm working my way down this painting. So where the two buds are meeting, that's where I'm dropping the darker paint. Where it looks like there's a bud overlapping another one, that's where I'm dropping the paint. And this sort of detail, it takes observation. As you look at flowers in nature, especially flowers where there's a lot of overlapping. Next time you look at flowers when it's springtime, or I guess you could look any time of year, there's always stuff growing. But look at how light works. Look at how shadows work. Look at where we're naturally seeing those darker values, those darker hues. And so for this painting, I'm kind of just imagining that the light also is the source. I didn't talk about this, but the source of light I'm imagining is just sort of coming from the top, radiating downward. So it's a little bit diffused, but some of these petals are going to be in sunlight, specifically the top lips of these foxgloves. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. Right now I'm thinking more about the tops of the flowers. because all of these buds have been a little bit more on the closed side. Okay, but now what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch to my other brush. So I'm switching to my size 6 round brush. So I have 2 brushes here. One I'm dropping paint with, and one I'm going to start smoothing out some of this paint. I like to keep my paint lines on the smoother side. I don't like hard paint lines when I'm painting detailed paintings. Sometimes I like hard paint lines, but if I'm painting a more detailed painting like this one, I am very intentional to try and create very smooth gradients. So I'll drop paint and then smooth it out. And you'll find that as soon as you bring that wet, or just slightly damp brush, I should say, as soon as you bring that damp brush to your painting, your paper, you're going to find that that paint is actually pretty easy to move around still. You just got to kind of use those bristle tips, activate that color, pull it around just a little bit. Okay, so switching back to my other brush. And so let's see here. Hopefully you can follow here what I'm doing. So this petal right here, or this flower, is the first one that I would say is a little bit more open. These ones all have like the beginnings of opening up. You can see we have these lines, but this one is actually starting to open up. So these flowers that are just starting to open up, what we're going to do is we're going to add pink to just the underside of those lines. You see how I'm doing that? We'll keep on moving down here as well. Go ahead and drop some pink on this petal here. I didn't drop it on this one quite yet. Same on this one here. Okay, then I use my smoothing brush. And I gotta just hand it to anybody who's watching this tutorial or desires to paint in this style. It takes a lot of patience. It really does. Sometimes I'm so blown away by the people in my watercolor community. It's called Bloom Watercolor Club. If you're not there, we would love to have you. But anyways, a lot of people share their art on a regular basis, just in the community, in the chat, and I'm always so blown away by just the patience and the consistency that people are willing to give to growing as artists. It takes a while. It takes a long time to learn the skills, and then even once you learn the skills, it takes a long time to paint in this style. But I think for some of us, myself included, I find this to be very, very therapeutic and relaxing and calming, sometimes frustrating, but also that's kind of enjoyable too somehow. I don't know. My painter friends will get it. I heard a quote recently that was like, painting provides enough, enough enjoyment and frustration for a lifetime, and I could not agree more. Sometimes it's so frustrating, and sometimes it's just like, this is so relaxing. I love this so much. Okay, so I'm going to keep on moving downward and following, like I said, the inside of these foxgloves. So I'm just dropping paint on the underside of those little kind of like lines that we have on the inside of our foxglove. Pause this if you need to. If you're starting to feel like I'm moving too quickly, you just pause it. No shame at all. I never want anybody to feel like they're falling behind and getting frustrated. Okay. Oh, and then this last one. So I've dropped paint on all of these little flowers, these little opening buds. I'm switching to my damp clean brush, and now we will do our smoothing technique. Okay, everything looks pretty nice and soft to me. Okay, so let's move over to our leaves for a minute. So we'll let that dry. As you can see, we're starting to really see some depth in this painting. Definitely have more details to add, but we will get there. Actually, one thing I want to add, I think while this is, also I realized I missed one right there. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to my pink mix here. So let me just show you real quick. So we have quinacridone, a little bit of yellow there. I want to add just a tiny bit of yellow because I'm seeing in my original painting just a bit more yellow on the openings of these flowers. So I feel like this is a good time to do it because this is a very light color here. Right here, I forgot to drop that pink color. So drop in just a tiny bit of yellow with me. Blot it as you need to. It's always this balance. It's kind of this dance between balancing the water. If there's too much, I'm blotting it. If there's too much paint, I can tell and I quickly blot it. I use my paper towel so much, especially in this style of painting, because you do have to kind of find, you're always kind of trying to find that sweet spot of the right amount of water, the right amount of pigment. It takes practice too, it really does, to kind of find that. Oops, there's a blue there. What are you doing there, blue? But yeah, it takes time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to become comfortable with that balance. Okay, happy with how this is all looking. Finding a couple moments to drop in a tiny bit more of that yellow, just a tiny bit. Again, you know, this is just my own eye is wanting to see a tiny bit more yellow. Maybe you like how yours is looking color-wise. I want a tiny bit more of that warmth. Okay, so we'll let that dry. Let's go back to our leaves, okay? Okay, so I'm mixing some green here. Kind of had it mixed already, but I have some green there, a little bit of yellow. I'm gonna grab actually a little bit of ultramarine blue down here at the bottom. I want there to be a little bit of coolness in it as well. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start with this petal off to the side here. Got my towel here ready to go. And what I'm going to do, so we have this like curve right here in this leaf. Keep that curve nice and light. Let's just add the green to that top side. I'm gonna add this green here to this leaf here. Same thing over here. Try and keep it light. We don't want to go too dark too quickly. We want to save some real drama for later. I'm going to go ahead and just paint this whole leaf here. Same thing here. And then one final leaf here. This one, I'm going to push it more towards the yellow green versus the blue green. So I'm reaching into the paint color that leans more towards the yellow to make it cool, and I'm leaning more towards the green that has blue in it to make it cool. I think I said that right. So more yellow means warm, more blue means cool. I think I might have mixed up how I said that, but yeah. Blue is cool, yellow is warm. Dropping a little bit of that cooler blue here down at the bottom, just right there as well. We can reach up into this stem right here and drop in some of that blue, that cooler color here. And actually, I'm going to make it reach even higher up into that flowery section right there. Okay, let's also go back to the top leaves while we're working with our green paint. I'm going to grab a little bit more of the blue green, and up here I'm going to drop in a little bit more I'm not covering everything I'm doing. I'm kind of thinking about actually dropping a little bit more of the cool on the bottom side of these leaves, or where it meets the flowers. So it's almost like a little bit of a shadowy green that I'm adding. Make sure that you're not touching any of your pink that's still wet. If it's still wet, wait for it to dry. Don't do this detail till later. Okay, we're gonna let these leaves dry. I love how they're looking so far. I'm going to put my brush down and take a quick drink of coffee because I've had, I think, 1 sip today, 2 sips. It was an ordeal to get the kids all like fed, and my husband took them out on a drive while I filmed today, and it was just kind of a little bit more of a challenging morning than normal. So I made a coffee, but I haven't had any time to drink it. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to my paint dropping brush. Also, just to show you real quick, I don't usually show brands of brushes I use just because, I don't know, I don't feel like I always need to talk about it unless somebody's very interested, but I got this one called the Aqua Elite Princeton brush, long round, and I've been really liking this brush. I like the long round versus the short round, or regular round brush. So the red one here is a regular round brush, but I just feel like that has like a really crisp, nice point, doesn't it? I really like how it paints. So that's a quick little free advertisement there. Okay, so let's go back to our flowers. I'm really excited to start adding some final details and really start to bring some realism or some depth and dimension to this one. So grab a little bit of your pink color, grab a little bit of your yellow, and here's a fun one. Grab a little bit of blue, tiny bit. We're gonna make this pink a little bit of a purple. Still pink, but a tiny bit. When we add a tiny bit of blue, it's going to do 2 things. It's gonna add a little bit of coolness, and it's going to de-intensify it just a little bit. So our pink and our yellow are such pure, bright colors, right? But when we add a tiny bit of blue, just a tiny bit, it's going to take down that intensity, and it's going to add a little bit of a purple color to it, just a tiny bit. Okay, so let me show you here. Let's see, I've got a scrap. Here's a scrap piece of paper here. So I'll show you before I paint. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm seeing there. If I add a tiny bit more blue to it, even darker, even less intense. And then, just for the sake of demonstration, I'll show you the color we've been using. So here's what it is without that blue in it. See the difference? Okay. So I'm gonna get this color ready. It's a little bit of a darker, and not darker, it's I'm using more paint here. So it still, you know, obviously it still has water in it, but don't be afraid of going a little bit darker here. You may want to switch to your smallest brush here. And get this out of the way here for a minute. And I'm going to start up here at the top. And what I'll do is just, we are really trying to bring in the drama of just darkest, darkest parts of this painting. So all of these little tiny crevices, that's what we're gonna do. And then in the spots where we kind of have these lines that look like they are the beginnings of these foxglove buds opening, I want you to just draw this horizontal line. And actually, I'm gonna do just a slightly lighter version on a few of them. I don't want them all to be too dark. So I'm cleaning my brush off a little bit, using my towel, finding that balance where it feels like the right amount of paint, the right amount of water. Just thinking here for just a minute. Okay, I'm going to also grab some more of this paint, and then what I'm going to start doing is I want to start adding a little bit more depth in those crevices, and I'm also going to start painting some lines. So these flowers are a little bit veined, okay? So we're going to have these vertical lines. Keep them very light to start. Keep your hand really light. Use your small brush. Trying not to cover all of the white. This is the part of the painting where you can really ruin your painting. It's the part of the process where you really can ruin it pretty easily. So just move slowly here. And I say you can ruin it mainly because I think that the thing that ruins paintings, I would say more often than not, is when you cover up the light too much. I think that I have ruined so many paintings by just covering the light too much, and sometimes it's hard to it's hard to fix that. You can bring in some white paint sometimes, but it doesn't always work the way I want it to, and it can be kind of tricky to do that. So always be cautious as you're adding your darker values to your painting. So I'm doing two things at once, I would say. I'm simultaneously trying to add more depth to the crevices, and I'm also thinking about adding veins to the length of these foxgloves. I think that I will also say we will probably do one more layer of paint after this is done. I think that the foxgloves just need a little bit more drama. We'll see how it goes. So dropping in that paint, a little bit darker up here in these crevices. And as these flowers are opening as well, you can start dropping in that darker purpley color right along the lines that we painted earlier. And then I'll switch to my clean, damp brush real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and smooth out some of those details as well. Keep all of my lines nice and soft. I think what I'm going to do here, I'm pivoting a little bit from what I said. I think that this pass of paint, this layer of paint that I'm going to do, I think it's going to be more focused on doing what I did the last round. Instead of focusing on creating those vertical lines, I'm actually going to pivot and actually just focus on just dropping in a little bit more of this darker pink and then smoothing it out. And then at the very end, we'll come in and add those vertical lines. But for right now, I want to just focus on making sure that the flowers themselves have the depth of color that I really want to get to. So dropping it into all of these little crevices and then dropping it underneath where the flowers are starting to open. Where there's overlap, there's going to be some shadow, okay? Here as well. Didn't add that in earlier. So using one paintbrush to drop my color, and then my other paintbrush to smooth it out. If you don't have two brushes that are the same size, you can just rinse off your one brush and then come back with it and then smooth it out. Definitely don't need to use two brushes, but I find it to be helpful. Trying not to cover too much of my lightness. I'm going pretty cautiously down these flowers. Definitely don't want to cover it up too quickly. I think the most beautiful paintings are the paintings that have an amazing amount of contrast. Especially in my mind, I love lights and darks. I love when a painting feels like it has very, very powerful lights and powerful darks. I think when a painting is all just kind of medium tones, I think it's a little bit boring. I think you really do need that strong contrast. There are a lot of ways to achieve contrast in paintings. I think that light and dark values is one of the best ways. Just smoothing out some of my details here at the top. I like it all to feel soft. No harsh paint lines, unless I really want them, until I add them. I definitely think that, yeah, there's a balance. I feel like I don't like to add the really harsh, strong, dark values until the end. Once the foundation is really, really strong, then I know, I'm like, okay, now it's time for this dark value here or there, you know. Okay, I'm just going to take inventory for one moment here. Decide what else I want to do. I'm going to smooth out the inside of my petals. I want that pink to be a nice smooth gradient all the way down. So just think about that, where the flowers are opening. Smooth that paint all the way downward. I would also love to know, just because I always find it really interesting with live classes, are you painting with me in real time? Or are you going to watch this now and paint later? If you're watching this way later, you can let me know as well. My dad is here. Hi, Dad. That's awesome. Good to see you, Dad. Okay. Just thinking here. Something that I really like about this painting, I really like that I can see, and I think it's because I'm using that more cool pink quinacridone red versus alizarin crimson. I see moments where that cooler pink really shines through. I'm specifically seeing it here. And then I see spots where the yellow is really coming through. And I love that. That's another contrast. It's a subtle contrast. The cool versus warm contrast. Versus, like I was saying, the dark versus light contrast. But when your painting is full of contrast, it's just going to feel amazing. You want to try and create as much of those as you can. Another great contrast trick is watery versus sharp. So having like a very soft underpainting and then having some like slightly like scratchier textures on top of it or harsher lines can be a really beautiful way to create that contrast as well. Okay. Okay, so I think now, okay, we're gonna move down to our leaves and see how we're doing on time. 46 minutes in, okay. I feel like my paintings, I think sometimes I think they're gonna go so long, but they always really do end up staying right around an hour. So go back to the green mix. Get some sap green mixed. I'm gonna grab some blue, some ultramarine blue in mine. Sap green, a little bit of blue, and the pink is trying to sneak in there too. Let me clean that out real quick. That's what happens when I don't have my palette level. Okay, so a little bit of blue, a little bit of green. Let's go to our leaves. So here's where we're gonna really start bringing in some details. So just follow your pencil markings. Follow those veins. I'm gonna do this quickly. The underside where that petal is, or that leaf is curling, I'm gonna make that a darker green. Here, I'll do the same thing. I'll make the curling part of that leaf darker as well. Okay, then I'm switching to my smoothing brush. So I just use one brush to smooth or to drop color, and now we're using our other paintbrush to smooth out those harsh paint lines. If you want to. If you like how it looks as is, you can just leave it as well. I am going to be strict with myself to not overwork this. I love leaves that are on the, we'll say on the underworked side, slightly underdone. I don't like when I overdo my leaves. I don't feel like it really adds to the effect of the whole painting to overdo them. I'd like for them to be just a little bit more on the, I don't know, impressionistic, soft side. That's just me. Okay, let this dry for a moment here. Grab a tiny bit more blue. Blue is my shadow color here. So I'm going to drop in a tiny bit more blue down here to the bottom, just underneath here as well. And then up in this, up here at the base of the flower, let's add some depth to that stem there as well. Where these two leaves are overlapping each other, I think it would just make sense for this one to be a little bit more in cast shadow. So we'll add a little bit more blue to that one. See how now we suddenly have different paint planes. So this one feels like it's pushed back a little bit because it's in shadow, whereas these two feel like they're floating in front of it. Then smooth that out just a little bit if it needs it. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry, and maybe I'll add more in a minute, but I don't think it needs too much more. I think the last thing I would maybe do, if I just want to finish these up real quickly, I would probably just add those, like I was saying, those very final kind of crisp, sharper details. Just so lightly adding in that darker blue and adding those veins. Trying not to overwork it, but I also am trying to match my reference photo. I did promise you guys that this is what we were going to be painting, so I am trying to match the reference as well. My style, I will say, so I painted this, like I said, in 2020, the original Foxglove painting that I'm referencing. My style is a little different. which I guess is totally understandable after 5 years, right? I think my style is a little bit looser. There's other things I think about more that I didn't think about when I painted this one, specifically lighting. So I think for this painting, I am trying to give a little bit more thought to where the light is coming from and how shadows work. Adding, you know, like the blue into the spots that are a little bit more shaded, etc. Okay, so let's go back to our flowers. I think it is now time for those final details. I am going to actually switch to my smaller brush now. My size 1 brush. Okay, so I'm going to show you my color here. So it's got that quinacridone red, tiny bit of yellow, and then a good amount of ultramarine blue. Okay, so see what that color looks like. It's dark. So the top of my flower, I like how the top of this foxglove is looking. I think the last thing I want to do is just add in those veins, like I was saying. If you think your painting needs any more drama, you can take this moment to add that as well. So I'm doing both. I'm adding a little bit of drama, adding a little bit of depth into some of these little crevices here, but I'm also thinking about adding those those vertical veins. Using this dark color is a really great way to also kind of accentuate the shape of your foxgloves. If you feel like they're not really like differentiating from one to the next, you can use just like the tip of this tiny pencil or tiny paintbrush to kind of create those lines. I love the look of these lines actually as I'm adding them in. It's such a great detail for this painting, for this flower. It adds a lot. Need a little bit more paint in my brush here. Using such a small brush, you really do lose water quickly. You got a ton of control when you use such a small brush, but it doesn't hold water for very long. Kind of have to reach back every 5 or 10 seconds or so. Trying to kind of just look at my painting objectively and decide what it needs here. Trying to stop looking at my reference now. And see where I want to add just that extra drama. Make sure you add those really, really dark lines to the inside of your flowers here too. And then we're going to do one of the best details. After we do the vertical lines here, those veins on your leaves or your petals, we are going to add those little dots to the inside of these flowers where they're opening. So, hold on one sec, let me just fix this right here. Okay, so before I do anything, I'm going to smooth out some of these details here. I want to keep those veins, but in a few spots I just want them to be a little bit softer. So just using this brush to smooth that out ever so slightly. One thing I also really, that like I think I maybe mentioned it earlier, but I really want the inside of these petals where they're opening. I really want that to be a smooth gradient all the way downward. So let me just make sure that all feels nice and soft and natural. As you can see, a painting like this definitely, it's not just like A, B, C, done. Like there's definitely a lot of kind of going around, fixing things as I go, even if I've painted this before several times. I feel like it's always kind of a process of working it out as I go. So if you feel like yours is taking you a lot of time and a lot of effort, you're definitely not alone. Okay, I'm gonna switch to my small brush here, get my darkest color, and starting up around, I think this flower here, I'm gonna drop in these little dots. However it looks right for you. Maybe 5 or 6. Doesn't that add so much? If your petals are still wet, if the flowers are wet, wait till it's dry to do this. Or at least mostly dry. It's okay if it's still just kind of cool, but you just definitely don't want there to be any sheen. So if you kind of get your head down, look to the side. If you see any sheen, just wait a sec. You can make those dots go all the way to the end if you want to. Make some of them a little larger than others. Miriam asked, what's the brand of these brushes? So I'm using a Series 7 right now, Winsor & Newton. The other 2 brushes I'm using are Princeton Aqua Elite and Princeton Heritage. Been very happy with those. Usually I love natural brushes, like natural sable hair brushes. I am currently on a synthetic brush kick. I've just been enjoying using those. I think what happened is I switched to the Rosemary Sable Synthetic Blend. And I must have just started there. I slowly was just like, oh, actually, maybe I kind of like synthetic brushes too. I thought I just liked the natural ones. Okay. Let me just look at this for a second. Take it all in. I want to add more depth to my leaves at the top. I'm going to grab a little bit of that blue, mix it in with the green. So ultramarine blue, a little bit of sap green. And I'm just wanting to see a little bit more, I think more just that shadow color in there with these leaves, just up here at the, kind of where they're cast into shadow, where it just makes sense. Something I would really love to do before I'm done here is I would love to erase the pencil markings. I can see a lot of pencil markings in this one, and I think I would really like, I feel like it's hard to know how this painting is really going to feel until I can erase the outer edge of these foxgloves. Okay, and I'm going to add a tiny bit more of that dark green here as well. Down here at the bottom. Tiny bit more accentuation of some of these veins. Follow the bottom line of that leaf there where it's curving. Maybe a tiny bit more differentiation there on the edge, on the outer edge. I like to just find little moments, like I was saying, to really bring in that drama at the very end, those very dark values, while also being very careful to not cover up too much of the light we already have. So we love to create that contrast. Final details here as we're working this. A little bit of that dark purplish color here. And I want to see more depth right here in this corner. I want to see a tiny bit more depth here as well. Look for a few extra moments where you can add just the tiniest bit of that dark, dark purple color. It is going to make this just look so dimensional and so just, yeah, full of depth. You don't want to overdo it, but you also don't want to skip it. At least I don't want to skip it. There's some painters, there's so many different types of watercolor painters, you guys. I've been reading this book recently called Capturing Light and Shadow in Watercolor. The guy who wrote this book, it's from the 90s. I think it's from 94. I think his name is Skip Lawrence, if you're interested in finding the book. His style could not be more different than mine. And there's so much that he even says and does that I'm just like, well, that's not my style, and that's okay. But you can still learn so much from other people's approach. And there's just so many different ways to paint with watercolor. And sometimes it's a little intimidating because it can make you feel like one person's way of doing it is right and your way is wrong. And sometimes I'm kind of tempted to feel that way, even myself. But I think there's always something to learn from other people's, their approach, but don't take it as gospel though. Even my approach is just my approach. I don't think I'm necessarily doing it right all the time because there's no real right way, I guess the right way is the way you want to paint. Okay, I'm really happy with this one, and I think it might be really interesting. Let me pull this up a little bit. I want to show you the original versus today's, because how interesting is that? So these were both painted in my beautiful sketchbooks. Okay, so this one was the 2020 version. This is the today's version. Colors are different. This one I feel like has like a little bit more of a scratchy, loose feel. This one is very, very, very smooth. I could probably get there. I think I need to just smooth out some of those details even further. Sort of like those last details I just did. Do I want to do that? Do I need to do that? Probably not. How interesting, huh? Even when you try to paint something the exact same way twice, it never happens the exact same way. But let me know your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed today's painting. I love doing these live classes. I don't know, there's just something about being with you guys in real time that is really, really fun for me. I don't get to paint with people like in person that often. So it's a really cool opportunity to get to connect with you guys and meet some of you and hear where you're watching from. And I hope you love how your painting turned out. And I just want to encourage you that if you stick with it, you are going to be blown away by what you're able to create. I promise. It just takes some time. Okay, my friends, I love painting with you guys, and I will see you again really soon. Bye-bye.